to this remarkable group of boys. I mean, they turned out to be remarkable. They, from all that anybody knew, these were just boys who had signed up for a boarding school that Baba had created. But Baba wound up revealing to them things that he had never told to anybody. And in fact, some of the stuff he never went into again. Some of it you'll find in, God Speaks in Discourses, but a lot of it you won't. And also the way that he presented it. Gil Alvarado isn't here, but he said that Chuggin, Baba's disciple Chuggin, one of the Mandalay who was there, told Gil, when Baba was talking to these boys, it was not like when he was talking to adults. All that mind stuff hadn't been built up yet. And Baba was communicating completely directly to them. It just went right directly through. And having worked with this text for as long as I have, 25 years now, man, I really can see what he was talking about. The ideas is not even adequate. The visionary perspectives, the horizons that Baba opens up are really amazing. Some of you who have studied God Speaks would have a feeling for the visionary aspects that, especially as you study that book closely, open up to you. But with these boys, it was right out there, right up front. And it's highly poetical. But the surprising thing about it is that even though the ideas are most extraordinarily profound, and the greatest philosophers are going to spend, centuries unpacking them, the language is really simple. He put it in, the sentences are short and they're vivid, and a lot of poetical language is there. So there's a Persian word, kashf, K-A-S-H-F, which means a revelation, an unveiling. I would say of all the books of Baba's that we have, this is the one that is most like that. The really critical part is it runs from about page 90 to page 300 or so, but there are a lot of diagrams, so it's not that terribly long. It's fairly, it's a substantial piece, but it's not as long as God Speaks. 34 lectures in the course of that. And some of them are really quite short and quite pithy. So the main purpose of these sessions, as Cassandra and I were conceiving it, is really to read it within the group. We won't, and I'm thinking that history, I hope you guys will be cool with this, but I do think we need a session on the history. We can't read that entire section. It's 80 pages long. Well, we could, but I think we shouldn't take that much time to do it. But I really do think we should have a session so that you see, it's not just what was happening with the Mer Ashram and the Prem Ashram, which some of you may already have read about. Sobs and Throbs is a magnificent account of that. But that's not the whole picture at all. When you see how Baba started with a very simple, rudimentary, I don't know, remedial in many ways school, with the Hazrat Babajan school for Erangel kids whose hair was full of lice and couldn't keep their clothes clean and didn't have clean water. And I mean, he was working on that level, and Baba was right down there with them, man. He would bathe them himself. He would wash their clothes. He would brush their teeth. He started on that kind of level, and it went, deeper and deeper and deeper as he opened Successes schools. And the whole prep that made the Prem Ashram, Meher Ashram possible, you get to see as Baba created this protective bubble around them and I sort of segregated them, isolated them from the world more and more, and created this amazing atmosphere where the Mandali were amazed. They had never seen anything like this happen before. Anyway, so next time will be a session going over that history and maybe reading some selections. I hope you guys will be game for that. So we won't really be getting into the reading of these lectures yet. But then on the third session, we'll start in on creation and its causes proper. And we had envisioned 2-hour sessions, and the first would be primarily reading. We could have different readers of it. I do think we'll probably need to have some, back and forth, even in the reading. There are a lot of diagrams, and you can't skip over. One of the things I've noticed in some of the Baba reading groups I've been part of is people will get to a diagram and they just skip it. Well, you can't do that here. They're really integral. And to unpack a diagram, you've really got to study it a little bit. So there'll be, that will be a significant factor, I would say, in our reading process. We could have different readers reading different things, so there could be some different voices. And also, if there are things that come up even in the reading, clarifications needed really on what we're reading, not on broader issues, but just on that. There would be some scope for that also. But then in the second hour, we're envisioning opening it up to questions more widely. As much as possible, we'd like to keep creation and its causes in central focus. Now, that doesn't mean that one couldn't bring in, let's say, something from God Speaks or infinite intelligence or other places if it's vitally relevant. You certainly can do that. We don't want to get diverted away, though, into other topics so that most of the people participating just don't know what's being talked about or are kind of, it's not their interest. We'd like to keep the focus on creation and its causes as much as we can, although it will be very natural and inevitable and necessary to bring in interrelations with other books sometime. So that's the main focus. So this session is broad overview, and next time will be history of the 4-year period. By the way, these talks were right at the dead center of that 4-year period. They're December 1927 and January 1928, from the 2nd of December to the 14th of January. And it was in January 1929 that Baba closed the Meher Ashram. Some of the Prem Ashram kids stayed on for a while longer, but we're really talking about January 1925 to January 1929, and this at the dead center. And again, I'll just make this comment. These talks are, I don't know what word you'd use. We don't have a good English word. Highly philosophical, cosmological, mystical. They're on those kinds of topics. At the end of most of the talks, Baba would say, the main thing I want you to remember is create love. Just create love. Love the master, love me. He would say that. That's the last paragraph of each talk. But all the rest of the talk is not on love at all. It's on stars and planets and Pran and Akash and these bizarre things, these amazing things, highly philosophical. Again, philosophy is a wretched word. But the reaction which these boys had was they went love mad. You wouldn't think that this kind of subject matter would precipitate that kind of a reaction, but it did. It unmistakably did. So obviously something was going on. It seems to me, how would I know? But when I try to understand this, I think that the avatar of the age was working with a select group from the youth of humanity, working archetypally on head and heart. So both of those. So what you won't see in the talks themselves, it was what was going on among the boys. They were going love mad. January 1st, 1928, the whole school began weeping uncontrollably. And the Montley didn't know what to do about it. It's like, what the heck is happening here? And this was right in the middle of those talks. But when Baba showed up and began his talk, instant silence, complete enraptured silence. As Baba would talk in English and it would get translated into Marathi and Gujarati and Persian. I don't know if any of you have been teachers, but for those of you who might have, what do you think about the prospects of giving a talk and getting it translated into 4 languages with a room full of kids there? It sounds to me like a formula for pandemonium, right?
So we're getting a question about who was interpreting for Baba at this time. He was using the alphabet board for this, or
yes, he was. He was. Okay. And we don't have. It's funny. It's never described. I could kick myself for not having asked these things of Sheriar Vasali when he was still there. Although he was in such a state, he probably never even saw it all. But so we don't know who read out from Baba's gestures. We do know that Rao Sub translated into Persian. So if you can, I don't know, can you picture the scene? In fact, why don't I start sharing just to, I'll be going into this in a second. Yeah. Here we go. Can you see that? Can you see that? Is it sharing?
Yeah. Can you zoom in on the picture there?
Yeah, I'll do that. These drawings were done by Nad Walinska. I think really a spectacular job. So she did this as a frontispiece. That's what is today Baba's Samadhi, right? It looked like more like that in those days. And there was a little platform. Baba was from the 20th of December, Baba was in complete seclusion. Hardly anybody saw him except the kids saw him, and the Mandali connected with this work. And then in the evening, about 7 o'clock, we're talking December, January, right? So completely black, and there wasn't any electricity. Ahmednagar was 8 miles away. Erangown, there might have been a few lanterns visible. So if you can imagine the magic of what was going on, and Baba would hold forth to these kids. Here's a quote that we put on here. Let me see, Shri concluded, who will get the apple. Now we will see whose destiny it is. It all depends upon prem, love. So leave all of this, have done with explanations and the like, and do only one thing, create prem, and I will do my part. For many as I like, I have that power. Have no doubt about that. So create and increase love. The time is very near. To some, I will show God. Some, I will make one with God. So can you imagine what that would have been like, right? Recognize the scene there? That's the Samadhi today. The stones hadn't been put up yet. Looking something. Actually, for the first 18 days, it wasn't there yet. Baba was giving these talks in what's called the West Tank Room, which is now the Mehrabad Museum. Do some of you know the Mehrabad? You know the Mehrabad Museum, right? There was no upper floor yet. There was no tower yet. It was just water tank buildings. So Baba talked there. But then on the 20th, Baba moved into the crypt cabin, as it's called. He was fasting. He fasted from the 10th of November until early May. And saw hardly anyone except people directly connected with this work. And so all the boys would be there, and there'd be a few Mandalay translating. So I just imagine this as pure magic. The stars overhead. Nadia did all this spectacular. Oh, these are actually from diagrams, because there's a lot in this series of talks about astronomy, if you can get that. I mean, but I'll tell you, you've never heard astronomy like this. So let me just, I'll read from the cover, because that's a good way of introducing the book.
Hey,
there's
Ward,
yeah.
Can you tell us how old the boys were?
Yeah, they were mostly from about 12 or 13 to 16, 17, 18. There might have been a few boys younger than that and a few older. Yeah. And they weren't local. I mean, there were some local boys, but there were a bunch from Persia. A lot of, they called them Moguls, Muslim boys from Bombay area. They're about maybe a third maybe a little more than a third Zoroastrian, a third little more Hindu, and a whole bunch of Muslims, including Muslims from Persia. So it was quite an international mix. Baba had advertised all over the place, even in England, in the leading newspapers of the time. So this was quite an effort to get the kids there. But anyway, this is what the cover is. And let me read from this will be useful. These things are useful introductions. Meher Baba's 34 lectures to the Meher Ashram boys in 1927 to 28, which comprise the heart and core of this book, give as visionary an account of the Silent Master's philosophy and teachings as can be found anywhere in the body of his published writings. Broadly speaking, the subject matter is what Baba later called the divine theme. That is, he wasn't using that term yet, but that's what the subject. That is the story of the soul's journey from the moment of creation to God realization. But yet the strange, vivid, poetic stream of Meher Baba's exposition proves the vehicle for many startling new ideas and perspectives that we do not find in God Speaks and other later books. So that's from the introduction. Here's the back flyleaf about the book itself. By the way, that's the one of the manuscripts there is being shown there, in handwritten form. Despite having been addressed to an audience of teenage boys, Meher Baba's cosmological account in these lectures is nothing short of revelatory. Early talks in the series explain the origination of creation through the clashing of Pran and Akash. Those are terms you're going to hear a lot. They're major terms. This creation narrative unfolds a strange landscape of light globes and shadows and reflections, oceans and waves and drops and bubbles. Later talks illumine esoterics of the spiritual path, especially in the relationship between the planes of consciousness and the associated skies or asmans. This is the leading source on this topic of skies or asmans, which is not in God Speaks. But here Baba says a lot about them. And it was, I always like to say that these were good students, because within about 10 days of Baba's describing the asmans, a bunch of the boys had gone there. They were up on the plains, up to the 6th plane, as a matter of fact, right after Baba had described all of this. This is another part of the book. I don't imagine we'll have time to get to these in this series, but maybe we will. This book also publishes 6 major discourses Meher Baba gave to his Mandali, along with a detailed history of his work with the Hazrat Babajan school, the Meher Ashram, and the Prem Ashram between 1925 and 29. As a critically edited text, sometime I'd like to say something about what that means. Creationist Causes surveys manuscript sources and unravels many of their textual knots. Appendices on evolution and mystical astronomy, a full glossary, index, and more than 40 color figures round out an unparalleled exposition on the sources and causes of the world we see before our eyes. So there's a little description of the book. And here's on who is Meher Baba. Who knows, maybe some of you guys have heard of Meher Baba, right? Anyway, Merwan Sheriar, known as Meher Baba, was born in Pune, India on 25th February, 1894. Over the next 74 years, until his physical passing on 31st January 1969, he lived a life embodying God's love and proclaiming God as the sole reality. Soon after his own spiritual awakening as a young man, Meher Baba established a community at Mehrabad near the town of Ahmednagar, where he opened a hospital, schools, and other institutions serving the local populace. It was at one of these, a boarding school for teenage boys called the Meher Ashram, that he delivered the lectures published in this book. So these are to the Meher Ashram. People always talk about the Prem Ashram. Well, the Prem Ashram came into existence kind of during this period, and it was a group of boys out of the Meher Ashram who were so overpowered with love that they couldn't continue in classwork. So the Meher Ashram is the larger body out of which the Prem Ashram was a kind of elite. You didn't exactly have the Prem Ashram when he was giving these talks, although it was beginning to happen. Over the half century of his mission, Meher Baba's wide-ranging activities encompassed global travels, extensive personal engagement with spiritually advanced souls known as musts, and an enigmatic phase known as the New Life. In 1954, he publicly declared himself to be the avatar of the age. Oh, let me mention, at the end of December, right days before that explosion happened, Baba pretty well told these boys that he was the avatar of the age. And that was a remarkable thing, because he had not been telling his Mandali that yet. The word avatar didn't come up very often, but he pretty clearly told these boys that that's who he was. Despite, these must have been a hell of a pack of kids, huh? I sort of think a lot of the spiritual hierarchy of the next 700 years is going to be these kids. Despite the silence inaugurated in 1925 and maintained until his death, Meher Baba dictated many books and messages. Creation and its causes now takes its place as a remarkable new addition to this body of work. So let me show you, to see what the book contains. Let's look at the table of contents. Sheila came up with this as a nice title page. Doesn't Baba look beautiful? I mean, it shows us with him with some of the kids in the rickshaw, Mehrabad rickshaw. Okay, so Meher and Prem Ashrams, a short history. This is a 90-page history, and there are 4 schools here. You know, there seems to be universal confusion about this. These were the 4 schools that come into the picture. There was first the Hazrat Babajan school for Arangan kids in local vicinity in 1925. There was the Hazrat Babajan High School. That was something completely different, accredited in Bombay and opened in 1926. Next time I'll be talking more about this. at the same time the Hazrat Babajan High School opened, Baba opened a boarding school, the Major Ashram, which quickly moved up to the top of Mirabad Hill in those water tank rooms, the ground floor of the big building up there. And out of that emerged the Prem Ashram. So these are all different from each other. The Hazrat Babajan School, the Hazrat Babajan High School, the Major Ashram, and the Prem Ashram. So this history, part one, talks about all of that. Sorry, I jumped pages by mistake. Then creation and its causes starts there. And you can see they're all listed by dates. Because these are in the original manuscript, they're all dated. So the 2nd December, 4th December, 5th, 6th December, etc. So that's the organization of this part of the book. This is part 2. And this, as I say, is the heart and soul of this book. This is what is really amazing about it. So these are all the talks. You can see they run up to January 14th, 1928, where they, I mean, it seems the Baba could have, nobody expected the series to end, but some of these bad boys, Chota Baba especially, was having 6 plane experiences, was on the verge of dropping his body. So it was such a crisis stage that Baba canceled the lectures and they wound up never resuming. So he could have had more in mind. We don't know that this is complete. Okay, part 3, as you can see here, is 6 talks that Baba gave to the Mandali, and it was during this very period, November 1927 to 10th of December 1927, just as these talks to the boys are starting. So these are new discourses that haven't been published before. And then the whole last part of it is the supplement. Now, this is kind of the scholarly apparatus, and so I won't go into this too much, but I do want you guys to sort of be aware that it's there. This is a critical edition, which means that it is based on a very exhaustive study of all known sources. It took years and years and years to do this, to go through all the sources. It has been edited. The prose has been edited. Actually, I was the only editor of this in conformity with what Baba has said about, we have comments from Baba on how this should be done. It's to make the prose more readable and clear without changing the ideas at all, to the extent that that's possible. And also, the other feature is that there's really full transparency. And this is where that happens. For anyone who wants to say, well, are these really Baba's words? Why should I believe these are Baba's words? What are your sources? And what have you done with those sources? Those are totally valid questions to raise. And it's addressed, as you can see, from page 359 to page 700. There's massive material on all of that. This second appendix on evolution, there might be some people who really take an interest on this. This really does give a lot about evolution that puts things together in a way that you won't find anywhere else. And then mystical astronomy and the processional of the planets. That's the third appendix. Baba says things about astronomy that you never got in your high school astronomy class. I can guarantee you. It is weird. It is absolutely weird. Just to give you one strand of weirdness, the sun, the Earth's sun, is a reflection of the Earth. Did you know that? But it is. So Baba and explains all sorts of, it must be relation of the physical universe to the subtle and mental universe. Anyway, and then notes on the figures. There are full comments on what the sources are, and sometimes interpretive information, very extensive endnotes. And then we have a key pronunciation and glossary. And the reason why, this is really for close students of the book, the reason why this could be of special interest is that the non-English vocabulary was only almost certainly words that Baba himself used. And our English vocabulary really is lacking for a lot of these spiritual metaphysical concepts. So it's, for people who take an interest in it, it's vastly enriching to get to know some of this. Then there's a bibliography credit and index, about a 20-page index. So let me scroll through a little bit of the book so you get a, that's the picture, right? 3 main parts: a history, the 34 talks, creation and its causes, and the 6 talks to the boys. And then there's all this supplementary material. By the way, the source manuscripts are going to be going up. Frank Blois has been working on it online. So if you want to go and look at the source manuscripts, they'll all be available there. This was done for Tiffin lectures, for those of you who are acquainted with that. Here's a list of all the figures that are there, and the tables too. Okay, if we get time, we could read some from the preface and introduction today. Let's see what our time looks like. Okay, here's the beginning of the history. I'll just scroll through. The Mandali there, he's Rausab. He was perhaps the most important Mandali player through this period. He was one of the 2 or 3 anyway, who really, we don't hear about him, but he was really a major actor in relation to the Mir Ashram and Prem Ashram. There you see Ramju Abdullah. If you guys are, he's someone really worth getting to know. By the way, if any of you get so fascinated with this topic, you want to do some reading for next week about the history, read Sobs and Throbs. It's on the Trust website. It's wonderful, his account of the Prem Ashram. So there's Ramju. He always looks very serious and severe. One of the great Mandali members. And there's Ali, who was the hero of his book, one of the central characters in that. So this is about the establishment. You see there, Baba's playing cricket. Establishment of the Mir Ashram. Then the creation of the Hazrat Babajan High School in the Mir Ashram, 1927. So, by the way, I haven't said, but we'll say there was sports every day. I mean, it was a well-rounded curriculum, actually, that Baba had going. This is on the right. Actually, Nashrawan supplied the source for this. This is an advertisement in England by Rustam, Adi's brother, to try to recruit kids from there. There's what the building looked like. Do you recognize it, guys? Right now, there's a 2nd floor and a big tower on top. So these were the tank rooms, as they're called. This is what the Samadhi looked like. So you see sort of on the left of Baba, the building there, that window was where he talked from at night. It was pitch black. They must have had lanterns and everything. So that's what the Samadhi looked like back then. That's the scene of the action here on the crown of Mirabad Hill. There's Ali once again. Now this was after the end of the lectures, when some of these boys had been knocked for a loop. To the right of Baba, our right, is Abdullah Pakrawan, or Chota Baba, who actually began to experience the 6th plane. He's to blame for the end of the lecture series. He was in such a state that Baba really had to attend to him constantly. He was in great risk of dying, dropping his body. So this is inside the crypt room, which is now the Samadhi. By the way, this is something worth knowing about. Starting here, the lectures themselves don't have introductions. I thought it was better not to be interrupted because Baba's series is very coherent and compelling. It's much better just to read it as it was, but it's also really important to know what was going on. at that time. So if you want to cross-reference, this section gives a almost day-by-day chronology from Chanji's diaries of what was going on during this whole period. You see 2nd December, which is when the talks start. And so you can see what was happening on the scene. January 1st, you can see it's really long because it was just wild what was happening. By the way, Shireen, Baba's mother, came, I think, about a week after this, and she didn't like what she saw, and she said, Baba, stop all these boys. They're crying too much. Get them to stop. So Baba sent her down the hill with Masaji, that would be her what brother-in-law, and basically said, don't ever come up here anymore. That was so much like Shireen. This kind of emotionalism was not her cup of tea. So a lot was going on at this time. And then this is the dam breaks, high drama, and the emergence of the Prem-ashram. This is after this talks ended. And this is a lot where a lot of the stuff in sobs and throbs happened. There's Abdullah Pakrawan, or Chota Baba, on the 6th plane. On the left, there is Asfendiar Vasali. I imagine some of you would have met him. He's one of the few Mayor Ashram boys. Okay, this is inside the crypt cabin, Baba's tomb now. Baba with several of the boys in this exalted state that they were in. Here's a picture of Baba with the Mayor Ashram boys. Abdullah Pakravan, he had dress in this kafni. He was in this high state during this period. Okay, so this is giving you a whole history of that time. In June, Baba, and this is from this time, Baba suddenly moved the whole ashram to Toka. That's about 60 kilometers to the north on the banks of the Godavari and Pravara rivers. He just suddenly did it. Can you imagine 300 people? And they were there for about 6 months. So these, Baba was dressed up, you see, as Krishna there. There they are boating on the river there. This is he moved back to Mehrabad in December, and January he closed it down. 2 years later, he went to England, and you can see on the right, there's Ali, one of the Prem-ashram boys, accompanied Baba. There, Chanji is there also, Malcolm Schloss on the left, Meredith Starr on the right. And so that ends the history. We also included a selection of documents from the time, which are quite fascinating for people who are fascinated by these things. One of these has a signature by Baba's mother, Shireen, signed in Persian, admission form. Here's a little brochure on the left for a cricket tournament they had with the kids from local schools. On the right, copy for advertisements that got published in all sorts of different places. You see, it corresponds with the New York Times. Here's a letter from China. Now, here's where the real thing starts. And so there's Baba. January 1928 is when that photo was taken. At the window, he would come to the window and talk like that. It was very cold at this particular time, so there's a blanket there. So I'll just scroll through and you can see what it looks like. It's full of these figures. These were done by Nadia Walinska. The figures will have keys which help explain them, and then the original, we'll put in like one original source figure where you can see where they came from. So here's where they started. Just scrolling. Yeah, here Baba explained these Sufi terms: shariat, tariqat, marifat, hakikat. But I would say the series really starts here. Here he really starts talking about creation. And so you can, anyway, too much to explain it, but you can see the pictures, see what it looks like. So Baba's explaining the creation of waves and bubbles and drops and foam and the creator point. And this one shows nothingness. Pokol or Akash, a really big concept, huge concept here. There's, okay, more on that. Here we see these strings of planets. C, D, and E are different chains of planets all around the universe, which Baba says a lot about. Here he really starts to talk about Pran and Akash. Here is Nadia drew this about Pran and Akash clashing, which is what gives rise to the universe. Okay. This shows the entire journey of the soul from unconscious God to God realization to the perfect master. This is we have these two slips in Baba's handwriting. Isn't that cool? They were just interleafed in the manuscript. Somebody, maybe Chanji, kept track of them. And the text of them is incorporated into the type text, but this is Baba's handwritten source original. And here's another little slip like that in Baba's own handwriting. Real treasures there. Now Baba starts talking about the gross and the subtle. There's a lot more to this than you might guess. Here you see the subtle world there, which means the 6 planes of consciousness being divided into 7 different layers. There's a lot on that. That's a fascinating thing, but I'm just going quickly because this is a brief preview. This is a most fascinating diagram about how opposites are very close to each other, thus A and Z. And that relates directly to this diagram. You see those on the bottom, you have the 2 gross eyes, and the center, the third eye. And man, there's so much to say about this, which we'll get to. This was drawn, this is on the cover. Baba said that the infinite corresponds to straight, the straight, and finiteness corresponds to the circular. And Nadia, as an artist, said that blew her mind for about 3 days. It really profoundly transformed her thinking. Okay, now we start getting into this strange stuff about astronomy. This is showing that the sun is a reflection of the earth. And Baba had a demonstration with lanterns and mirrors right there. And this was still in the museum room, the West Tank room, where he showed them how 1 light globe produces 7 suns. And then there's this most bizarre diagram where you see 1 light globe producing 7 suns. A, B, and C are the 3 worlds. A is our Earth. Okay, more on the planets. Then Baba started getting into evolution. And here's where Baba really explained that the only form that exists is the human form. There was supposed to be a diagram of it, but there's just a blank there. So Nadia, we worked on this to show how the human form unfolds and goes through a series of turns through the course of evolution until it's standing upright in the human form. This is the main source for that idea, which is an amazing idea in all of spiritual history. I've never seen that. Okay, this is about sanskaras. I'll just go quickly. These are really neat metaphors Baba gave. And now Baba, yeah, this is beautiful. There are 7 suns and there are also 7 moons. He brings the moon into his astronomical account. The moon is an old Earth that cools off, moves aside and becomes a moon. Also, Baba talks about the 4 elements in evolution, air, water, earth, and fire. And Nadia drew this. We spent a whole year and a few months meeting 4 days a week on these diagrams. We really went into them deeply. showing how the first kingdoms, stone, metal, vegetable, worm, are connected with earth, fish with water, bird with air, and animal with fire. So this is another dimension to Baba's account that you really don't find in his later discourses. Okay, now we start getting into involution of consciousness. And I'll just show you the one diagram that illustrates this. This diagram is about the 7 planes, right? You know about those from other readings, first, second, third, it's up to the 7th. But then these are the skies or asmans associated with them. On the left-hand page, you can see all the Persian names for them. The first sky or asman is called the Alame Waktiya. The second is called the Alame Ruhani, etc. And this diagram shows the different sections. The first sky has 3 subdivisions. The second has 2. The third has 3, etc. So Baba goes through these and gives the boys a description of what you find there. Again, there's nothing like this in God Speaks. Okay, there aren't as many pictures, so so this is where he's describing about all the different planes. Then Baba starts looking at the inner worlds from a different point of view. I would call this, he doesn't use the word here, but Chaitanya. First plane, you get inspiration. The second plane, revelation. The third plane, insight. Fourth plane, intuition. I think Don Stevens people might be very interested in that. They work with and so forth. And these are the 7 levels of bliss: Vishayanand, Chintanand, Yoganand. Those are associated with different levels on the spiritual journey. Now Baba goes into there's so much weird stuff, how the planes and the asmans correspond to parts of the human body. And I'll just show you the diagram. There was no diagram. We just came up with this. So here you can see the correlations between the planes and parts of the skeletal frame. It seems to be the skeletal frame. And the asmans correspond to hollows in the human body that are related to the planes. I think in the future, people interested in medicine or physiology or yoga are really going to plumb the depths of all of this. And then Baba gave this very strange analogy. I'll just show you the picture. We'll read it in due course, which he said explains all of this and has never been given before by any master. He just gives the analogy and doesn't explain it. The last 3 lectures may be the weirdest of all. And I'll just say this much. They look at the inner worlds from the first plane to the 7th and the skies that are there from the standpoint of the downflow of pran. Pran begins on the 7th plane and flows down like a river with waterfalls through the different planes until it hits the gross plane, and then it starts to create bubbles. And that's where the gross appears. So this is a different, have you ever seen it described? Did you know that pran flows down from the 7th plane? So, yeah.
If you don't mind, can I leave?
Sure, that's fine.
Everything is going good?
Yeah, I think everything is fine.
If you want, you can just call me.
Okay, thank you. Naman is going to be going. Thank you so much for setting us all up here.
Thank you, Naman. We're coming up on an hour or 2, or so.
Yeah, so I'll go more quickly. So this, anyway, so that's the end of this series of lectures. And now we get these 6 talks to the Mandali. The second is on the search for God and the path for love. These were November, December, when the boys were just starting. This is on Hafiz. This is apparently stuff that Baba gave out on these subjects. On impulses, sanskaras, the circle, prarabdha, and the master. He talks a bit about the education of kids here, and how when the spiritual impulse breaks out, let it go, don't check it. It'll come into balance in due course. What is religion? What is Turiya Avasta? So those are the 6 talks. Now for the supplement, I'll just scroll very quickly. This long essay introduces some of the philosophical and metaphoric ideas, oceans, light globes as cosmological metaphors, some of the idea content that might have been difficult, that might be new. And then it goes over a lot of the manuscript discourses here for people interested in that. Goes over it in a great deal of detail. And talks about the editing. Okay, so anybody with questions about these matters, like how is it that you're presenting this as a book of Baba's? Well, this is where all of that gets addressed in great detail. This one gives a lot more technical information about these source manuscripts, the explanations manuscripts, and so forth. We have some handwritten things from Ramju. Then this is on evolution, and in a way it's very detailed and very technical, but in another way it gives people interested in this, I really would, on evolution, Baba's account of evolution, I really would recommend that they read this. It goes over the 7 kingdoms and transitional species, sometimes called Barzaks. We get a whole bunch of new, we've learned new information about what some of these were. From the tortoise is the Barzak between worm form and fish form, for example. Crab is the last in the fish form as it's moving up to the land again. There's a whole appendix on astronomy for people interested in that. The 18,000 planets or the 3 planets. And then I'll just scroll through this. You can see the figures. This is giving a detailed source information. These figures are going to be up online, the source figures, the sources that we are working from. We spent a lot of time studying source diagrams, and anyone who wants can see them on the Trust website. And then we have these endnotes. And I mean, I spent years and years. One short paragraph here represents hours and hours and hours of work, I can tell you. So this is just dealing with questions of the text, what the text is saying and how it should be expressed and edited. Anyone interested in these questions, this detailed information is there. I realize there'll only be a few people interested in this, but I want people to be aware that there's full transparency about the editing, you know, all these editorial decisions, anything of any significance is fully talked about in these notes. And I hope we'll eventually be able to get these endnotes up where you can click on the sources and go see them. Right now, there aren't going to be many people who go into this, but in the future, there will be when these things get studied more. And maybe people may want to criticize the editing and the edition and may want to do a new one they'll feel it needs to be improved on. That could happen. Okay, and then the section after this is the glossary. And in the glossary, as I'll show you, you get, okay, like adu. In the key to pronunciation, you get told what all these diacritical, what a dot under a D means, what, you know, all these, what a macron means. And you'll get a definition and you'll get etymology, language from Sanskrit, Gujarati, and you'll get all the pages on which that word occurs. So anybody, if you were interested in the vocabulary and you want to find out all the pages, like this one here, Atma. There's a word where there are a lot of occurrences. All the occurrences of the word Atma, well, here they are. You see all these page numbers. So this is a lot of information for people who really want to do a deep dive into all of this. And then we have credits after this. And the final section is going to, bibliography is there and an index. And I can tell you an index is a huge job, having done this one and a bunch of others. It's really quite a task. So there's a picture of what the whole book looks like. And I would say most people will, maybe some people will really get interested in the history as time goes on, but there's no doubt that the spectacular part of the book is this one, these 34 talks. Okay, this has run on for more than an hour. Maybe we should open up.
You want to stop the share and we can open up for questions?
Yeah.
I don't know if we need the share, but we'll see.
Yeah,
Anyway,
we can always do it.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm asking people to raise your hand. Otherwise, we get a lot of crosstalk, and remain muted until I call on you. So the instructions for raising your hand have been posted in the chat. I will repost them now, I think. Working on it. And then when I say go, you raise your hand. Ah, Mahu beat me. Okay. Go ahead and raise your hands. And Mahu gets to go first. Please unmute, dear.
Oh.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, Ward and Cassandra and everyone else. Before I ask my question, I would like to express my deep gratitude and appreciation for this work that you've done, Ward. I mean, this is monumental, and just the progress of how, this Baba has laid this out, that after all the books that came out of the manuscript, now it's the turn for this one. And I thought about it, and I don't know of anybody, Ward, whether you like it or not, who's able to do this job. And I truly, truly appreciate it. Thank you. And the fact that you're sharing it with us via Zoom and so forth. I have one question and then two small informational questions. The first question that I have is, what is the correlation between, for example, this book, and it's huge and a lot of stuff is covered, but just maybe you can take a part of it and because it's important to me. What is the correlation between what Baba talks about here and what he talks about in, for example, God Speaks? I know when we had those series of God Speaks meeting with you recently, when we were in Divine Theme, there were parts that you were talking about this book. You said, well, Baba talked more about this in creation and its causes and so forth. So perhaps he elaborated on some of this, but like, for example, what is the relationship between the glossary here, which I really thank you for putting it together. That's a great help. And what is in God Speaks? Because I noticed the Avesta, Avesta and Sanskrit words do not change. They're the same, or the Sufi terms. But why do you think Baba came up with this? Just why do you think? I mean, of course, this was before God Speaks, because God Speaks was in 1959. This was, as you mentioned, was 25 till 29. But why do you think that Baba came up with this? if it makes sense, my question.
Well, this is the third of these three major bodies of material, all found in this leather briefcase in the Rice Go Down. That would be Infinite Intelligence, Tiffin lectures, and these series of talks. And they collectively, along with In God's Hand, provide a kind of I'm calling it the early Mehrabad dispensation from Baba. When the book gets found, that will be, of course, a colossal new body of information. But Baba, it's when Baba began to talk after 1931, Baba's discourses changed a lot. He simplified enormously, although in a way it's not fair to say that, because even those short messages he gave to the West are very profound and very exquisite. But he pulled it way back in a lot of ways, because a lot of this Indian metaphysics would have not been easily understood by Westerners at that time. But then he built it up again through the course of the discourses and God Speaks, and God Speaks is highly developed. Those later works, what you find in God Speaks, especially about discourses, are more systematized. They're not completely systematic philosophy. I really couldn't say that. But Baba had worked out in a more intelligible, coherent scheme and filled in a lot of the gaps. And a lot of the things that seemed to be contradictory early on, he resolved. Most of the contradictions are just in the use of terms. So he standardized his terms. So if you really want a full account of the divine theme, God Speaks is the place for that. And if you really want an account of how a seeker pursues the spiritual path, the discourses are a place for that. They're in a very universal language, a very global presentation, although they can be quite difficult. God Speaks can be quite difficult. So these early talks are really more narrowly focused in a certain way. They were really addressed to the people before him. But this particular, as I said earlier, this particular bunch of talks, even in the context of the 1920s, was unique. Baba hadn't told the Mandali much about the spiritual path, but he really did tell these boys a lot about it. And it's very visionary and poetical and very beautiful. And its language is very simple. Also, Baba brought up topics here that he dropped later, like Pran and Akash. It's a big, big part of Meher Baba's darshana. There's just no doubt about it. And there's a whole creation narrative that he did not explain later, you know? So that's some material that's quite new that needs to be integrated into what we have later. There's a lot of stuff on certain details of evolution. This stuff about astronomy is just bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. And we'll get to it, and people will just have to, Baba must be talking about how the physical universe relates to and derives from the subtle universe. It must mean that. And later on, he never tried to explain any of those things. And the stuff about the planes and the asmans, again, you won't find that in God Speaks. There's a whole parallel structure. We have the 7 planes ascending, but we have these asmans ascending also. And they're like places, and Baba says what's in them, you know, who's in them, and their colors, and not all that much. Okay, the second, just an easy one, is like heaven and hell. That's where those are. So when you die, you go up to the asman of the second plane. So there's a lot of material that you won't find later. Baba dropped it when the Westerners showed up. I think it was too esoteric. and he never got back to a lot of it again. So in all those ways, it's very different.
All right, Jim Wilson has a question.
Unmute. He's muted.
Yeah, you got to unmute there, buddy.
Unmute.
I get a nickel every time.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Who do you think you are anyway? Meher Baba? Keeping silence?
Well, I want to go back to kind of the very beginning of your introduction and the idea of Baba's philosophy and teachings. I wonder if you could enlighten us a little bit about the word philosophy. If I could throw my two cents worth in to start with. I find that a lot of people in our discussion groups and stuff find it very difficult to deal with what might be philosophical or what is intellectual and all that sort of thing. And I believe the West has a prejudice about philosophy that tends to be knowledge for its own sake. That idea, especially in science, research to learn some new fact for its own sake. Who knows what the value of it's going to be, maybe generations from now. But I think about the word philosophy, which basically means love of wisdom or love of gnosis. And the whole idea of gnosis and wisdom is that somehow it transforms us. It's not just a matter of knowing a concept or an idea, but that it actually works within the very fibers of our being, our cellular structure up through all of our mental processes. And that, for example, Socrates was known for what was known as responsibility. I forget the Greek word, but the idea of responsibility is that when a truth is given, that there be a response, not just of the mind or not just of philosophizing, but a response that includes the heart. It includes a transformation. It's a transformative kind of experience. So in the ancient concept of philosophy, love of wisdom and stuff like that, I think Baba fits well there because our modern concept of philosophy is so polluted with atheism and other types of things, just rationality. Baba is rational, he's logical, but all of the truth he is giving us is transformative. And so I don't think philosophy is such a bad word. It just has a really lousy reputation in terms of modern philosophies that often got off into all kind of crazy tangents. What is your feeling about that?
Yeah, no, I get exactly what you're saying. Back at its source, philosophy was something more like what Baba is giving. That is, it's not just intellectual truth, but it's the cognizing and realization of truth. And in recent centuries, it tends to become a purely intellectual activity. But in the real sense that you're talking about, philosophy is a very beautiful word. Baba doesn't seem to have liked the word.
No.
Because I think that's because of its, what it's become in philosophy departments, where often it's, they reject study of being and ontology, and it's just epistemology and arguing terms and analytics and all those sorts of things. That kind of approach can be very sterile. But actually, this is a really good book in relation to which to engage that very question, because Baba was giving to these boys, in the sense that you're using it, philosophy in the real sense. I mean, cosmology, creation cosmology, the spiritual path, an account of the spiritual path. And it's really quite abstract, a lot of it. And it's very subtle and very deep. And I would have thought that kids that age, it would be over their heads. But obviously it wasn't. But then their response was to go love mad, right? So obviously we're having a connection of head and heart, it seems to me. Baba was speaking to them on matters of the head, but man, their hearts were just on fire. In fact, towards later end, he says, when you get near the spiritual path, your eyes start to turn a bit red. I can see this in you. I can see this in some of you, you know? So this is going on right in these talks. So, I mean, the future of humanity as it grows into Baba's vision of things clearly will have to entail the reintegration of head and heart, and where the intellectual study of things will have to be open to the visionary and beautiful depth also, and not be sterile to that. So this is a absolute model for Baba doing that. Because of the, I don't know, I find the connotations of the word philosophy hard to get beyond. I'm open to people who feel otherwise, and I certainly understand that at its source, with people like Plato, it's a beautiful word. But I've been, and I hope you guys will not object if for my part, I often will use the word Meher Baba's darshana. And this is a use of this word that means not just a intellectual account of things, but a revelation of an understanding from someone who knows, someone with divine knowledge, like a revealed truth from the avatar, from the Christ. In Christianity, they would use the word revelation, and darshana contains that. And it also implies a spiritual path. That is, the purpose of this knowledge is so that you can use it in your ascent to God. Word darshana implies all of that. So very often I'll just say in Meher Baba's darshana. So I mean all of that, the philosophy, the cosmology, the ethics, the spiritual path, the spiritual exhortations. Like at the end of these, you saw some cases where Baba said, the point of all of this is create love, create love. Well, that was a part of his talks. This, I really do encourage those of you interested to look at this and notice he doesn't talk about love hardly at all until the last paragraph of each talk. And then he says, the point I want you to take from this is to create love. Well, Baba, if that was the point you wanted them to take, why didn't you talk about it in your lecture? You didn't talk about it one little bit. But man, those kids got it. They got it.
Don't you think too that the idea of the logos, which was obviously?
So, I'm sorry, Jim. Can we hang on to that for a moment?
Sure.
There are more questions, and we can't get into things too deeply right now. But before it's getting late, it's almost an hour and a half, and some people want to leave.
Yeah.
So maybe we can pause and do a little housekeeping for next time. Now, we talked earlier about the possibility of moving these sessions to Sunday mornings. So that would be 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. And what time in India? Like in the evening?
I think it's like 11 would be 8:30 here.
8:30 p.m.
Yeah.
PM. So I just wanted to see if people wanted to make a comment about that, or maybe we could have like a show of hands, or I don't know. Just say, maybe put in the chat what your preference would be. I mean, we hate to pull the rug out from under people for this time, but there have been requests for a better time that more people can attend. The second issue is, I promise you that within 24 hours, I will send out the links to the mailing list for the video recording, so that it'll be available to people who are not able to attend. Okay. Great. So those are the two things I wanted to bring up. Please feel free to post in the chat window what your preference is. I'll save that and we'll tabulate that and we'll get back to you with that. Okay, thank you. So go ahead, Miriam. Can you unmute, Miriam? Or did you forget the question?
No. So it seems, in regards to what Jim is talking about, and where these lectures evoke these experiences in the boys, could it be like empathy or mirror neurons, where when Bob is talking about these things, he's like evoking an experience of them in the boys?
Yeah.
Where it's
Yeah.
not just intellectual, but it's a evoking process.
Yeah, I know. Of course, I've thought a lot about this, working on it for so long. And I have a very vivid picture in my mind somehow of when Baba would, okay, this is just me talking. I wasn't there, so it's just my speculation, but I have the impression that when Baba would explain these very esoteric things and intellectual things, you could say, in a way, his way of explaining it when he would gesture and show was so vivid that those kids would get it.
Right.
Now, I think it's very likely that the next morning they wouldn't have been able to repeat much of it, and 5 years later they might not have been able to remember it. But I think that Baba's, he even something like pran and akash, pran means energy, but it means movement, and somehow he'd make a gesture where you would kind of get a feeling of universal movement. And akash is hollowness and receptivity. And he would show, you would feel a hollow space we're receiving. And these deep, profound ideas would be enacted by him in a way so that these kids would get it.
Right.
So Ramju says in his beautiful account on this, right in the introduction, they took them right to the verge of experience. And I think it was like that. I think the way that Baba would present these very strange and abstruse ideas was so vivid in the moment that they were right on the edge of the spiritual domain where they could almost see it. Because these were kids, they were open. And of course, very soon a bunch of them did. They went there. But I think the whole bunch of them were just captivated and could see the whole thing. And again, I would have no way of knowing this, but so just, if you want to just hear my bullshit, I think it wasn't necessary for these kids to remember the details of what Baba said 3 years later. I think the essence of his work was the universal work, working with a bunch of kids and making these impressions on them. And by doing that, he was doing it for everyone in the entire universe and for the future youth. And by marvelous good grace, we have it now. We have a record of them. So I think you can, so I do suggest when read it, try to imagine yourself a kid sitting there with the stars out there and you've been totally isolated from everybody. Even the Mandalay couldn't touch the kids. He wouldn't allow them to touch them. They couldn't even talk to them unless it was related to the boarding school business. And there was this magic all around them. And there's this beautiful, beautiful Baba there. And he's showing you these things and you're spellbound. I think that's what was going on. And I think to achieve that connection with them was the work he had to have done. Whether they remembered it or not later didn't matter. That's what I think.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Well, we will be able to get into these issues more later on, but today, let's just try to do a few more questions. Greg, you had posted in the chat. Do you want to unmute and bring up your issue or wait for another time or whatever? Also Ellen. Otherwise, we'll go on to Mahu, who's been waiting for one more question.
Oh. Sorry, I don't want to take other people's time. It's my
I
second
know, it's-
round. Yeah. Well, you know, Jim Wilson read my mind and asked my question. And that is about I would say, the common, or in a way, you know, misuse of the term philosophy in public eyes, not Baba lovers, maybe some Baba lovers as well. I remember when Nashwan published that, I think he's here, published that book, Teachings of Meher Baba, and then I posted it on social media. A few people questioned it. They said, why this? I mean, I didn't even look at the book and what is in it. They said, Meher Baba said, I have come not to teach, but to awaken. So why is he having a title, Meher Baba's teaching? You know, that's Baba lovers. But Ward, couldn't we, you know, as you were presenting this, and I haven't seen the book, couldn't we use, for example, metaphysical? I know philosophy, as you explained it really well in response to Jim Wilson's question, contains, you know, rationality, logical, as you know, as to a lot of other, you know, concept. It's integrated under this banner: theoretical, analytical, you know, reasoned, you know, reasoning and stuff like that. But just this particular word of philosophy is, maybe we can, when we talk to people, or, you know, is Meher Baba is redefining these words, you know, he's redefining, it's a new meaning to it compared to what Plato or Socrates or other people used it for. You know what I mean? Like that.
Well, maybe, I mean, this will be a question for the Baba community to work out how they want to relate to the word philosophy. I'm tending, as I say, to try to promote the word darshana. This is the standard word in India, by the way, like Vedanta is a darshana. Samkhya is a darshana, and it implies, darshan actually means a seeing, a vision, right? And the problem with, like, say, metaphysics, metaphysics is one subject area within philosophy, but it doesn't encompass ethics. It doesn't encompass the spiritual path. See, a lot of the discourses are kind of telling you how to do it, how to actually work your way through issues in your journey to God. Well, philosophy is a discipline. Again, back in the days of Plato, it did mean that, but it hasn't meant that for a long time. But anyway, for the purposes of our discussion here, use whatever word you want, and we'll muddle on through.
Sure.
We're all good with muddling.
Anything you say is fine, Ward.
So Cheryl, I'm sorry, Cheryl, did you have a question?
No, more a comment. Ward, so many times I've heard you say how amazing it is that these boys were this age. They were so young. From the very first time that I ever heard this information presented, which was from and through you, I felt these boys were ready for it. Their ages were irrelevant. They were primed already. These boys were on the path already. And I've wanted to say that for a long time. So that's my first comment. I mean, it's not surprising to me at all. And the second thing is what Jim brought up so wonderfully, is that here's the God man radiating out love. And then he's so, you know, you say again and again, he's not talking about love. He's radiating it. And in the meantime, he's talking about what we would call material from a more mental perspective. And I remember one of the things that drew me years ago, I believe it was in a discourse meeting, that Baba said that the balance of the head and the heart. And here we have it. That is what is so incredible. Again, to me, it's irrelevant how young or old these boys were. It's that their fibers of their being are absorbing this mental information. At the same time, there's this effusion of love. And I believe as well, it's a template for the balancing, which Baba said we have to do before God realization, the balance of the head and the heart.
Looks like that to me.
So
obviously these were unusual boys. Nobody would have known it beforehand. I mean, they for all anybody knew, they just were signing up for an educational program that had been advertised through these various channels. And that's what everybody had to expect. But these must have been great souls, I think. Again, I'm giving you all my, I don't know, donkey, when donkeys, lovers pray and donkeys bray. So this is a donkey braying. I couldn't possibly know this, but okay, I will say this because Baba did say this. He pretty well told these kids, you're not in my circle. And he was talking a lot about his circle in that, actually in one of these talks in this book. He tells the Mandali about it. In the previous years, he had told them a lot about the circle, but he told these kids, you're not in my circle. And I'm very struck by the fact that after they left, hardly any of them came back again. They went out and lived their lives. Some of us saw Asfendiar Vasali, so we got a really good dose of one of the really, I mean, if you're going to talk about not ordinary kids, we look at Asfendiar, that was not an ordinary man. I think many of you would agree with that, obviously. So, of course, he was one of the stars, you might say, but not all the kids were Premashramites. But most of them just left, never came back. And you might say, well, why? I mean, why didn't they become his lovers, become part of groups of lovers? And what I think is that wasn't their role. I think that these were kids not meant to be in the community of the Avatar's lovers, but meant to be part of the maybe spiritual hierarchy, some of them. Maybe I've always thought these have a destiny in the period between that now and the next advent. You've got to have great souls. And some of them will just, some kid will be born and then all of a sudden he goes off like a bomb and becomes a superstar. Okay, St. Francis, like that, or that kind of person. And you'll say, where did this come from? Well, it came from the Meher Ashram. It came from hearing Baba give these talks. And they'll be great luminaries for the whole world. I think that was the role which these kids had. They weren't meant to be part of the general community of his lovers at all. And also, again, I couldn't possibly know this, but I still do very much think Baba was working universally when he was talking to them. And as to the age, these must have been souls so matured and developed as to be fit to receive content like this. Obviously, these weren't ordinary kids. They might have looked like it, but they weren't. But at the same time, I do think that age was relevant to the work Baba was doing, because, when you're 13, your mental apparatus is still kind of fluid. And maybe you start to think about things at that age. I did, as a matter of fact, but your opinions aren't fixed and your values aren't fixed, and you're responding to all sorts of stuff in your environment and starting to gel. So Baba caught them at a time where they could receive this in a way that adults couldn't have. Now, adults would have been really interested, I'm sure. Sometimes some of the Mandali were present, but not like these kids did. I think it went, that's what Chuggan said to Gil Alvarado, as I mentioned earlier. It just went straight in. They were at an age where it could just go straight in without any kind of mental interference. So
Yeah,
when you read it, the more you can put yourself into that state, the better.
And
I agree
just
with
one
that
more,
one.
one sentence, please, Cassandra. Baba said to go out and be in the marketplace, not up on the mountain, standing on one leg. And that's when you say, you know, which I didn't know what these boys did afterwards, most of them. They just went out and they were, and so did Asfandiar for many, many years as a farmer. Go out, be in the marketplace, do not, you know, and that's what I'm.
That's what happened. That's what happened with just about all of them. Yeah.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I
Thank
have a hard time remembering.
It's okay, thanks. And I'm so glad this is being recorded and posted later. This is fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm going to end the recording at noon, but we can continue chatting if Ward feels like hanging on. I think he might want to go to bed. I don't know.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine.
But the other thing I wanted to mention was that we will be able to get more in depth with these things in later sessions, because, you know, the fact is none of us has the book yet. So we're debating things unrelated. So Jim, did you have something else?
You're muted.
Another nickel. Put another nickel in the jar. That's the rule.
No, just 2 sentences. Baba's word is the annihilation of all words. And that's his silence. I mean, what do I know? But I kind of feel that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Baba was giving all these talks literally in silence. Again, I'm so struck. I mean, I hear that classrooms and schools nowadays are a jungle. So if you try to imagine someone in silence dictating to someone else who reads it out and getting translated into 3 languages, I think in a typical American high school, you'd probably have about 10 people getting killed within the first hour. I'm being a little facetious here, but nobody even mentioned how it happened. Nobody even, none of the diaries even saw fit to mention it. I guess it was so, I would think this would be a really laborious process, wouldn't you? You've got to dictate, it's dark. Can the person read very well? I presume whoever read out read loud enough so they all could hear it. And then you've got to have 3 different people translating into 3 different languages, and the kids just sit there while it gets translated. Wouldn't you think that was a formula for trouble? But no one ever mentioned it. So I guess it went so naturally and so smoothly that no one ever thought about it. I think that Baba was spellbinding. I think even when somebody would be reading out what Baba had said in another language, you know, maybe you spoke Persian and the Persian had been read out and then they were doing it in Gujarati, which you didn't know. But Baba would be watching and listening and making little gestures. And he would be so fascinating to watch that that's all you would do as a kid. You know, at the beginning, at the end of these sessions, apparently they would embrace Baba. And I just remember Asfandiar talking, and I don't know if it's at these sessions or not, but I have the impression that it was. But the kids were all over Baba. They would just grab him and wouldn't let go. So all of this was going on, you know. So at the beginning and end, they were just waiting for their chance to have their hug with Baba. What an amazing scene. What an unbelievable scene. There was never again was there anything quite like this. Baba had other amazing scenes. I'm not saying he didn't. But with working with kids this way, this was the time for that.
Well, I think I will stop the recording at this point. Everybody's okay with that. And I will send out a weekly link You'll get it about an hour before the session. I
Mhm.
will also send out information about what the decision is, whether we're going to continue doing it